This is a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about faith, fear, and what happens when a man meets something he cannot explain in the darkness of a prison cell. What he experienced in that moment changed his life forever, and the price he paid afterward will break your heart. Stay with us until the very end. You will not regret it. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Let us connect as a family and lift each other up in prayer across every nation and every time zone. This is a true story. No names will be used in this narration for reasons of personal safety and the protection of those still living close to the situations described. The locations remain as they were. Everything else is as real as the ground beneath your feet. I was born in Iran in the spring of 1971, the third son in a household where faith was not a choice but structure, the walls of the house itself. By the time I was old enough to understand what prayer meant, I already knew the words by heart. Islam was not something I practiced. It was something I was, and I carried that certainty with me through every door I ever walked through, including the ones that were locked from the outside. I left Iran when the political air turned thick and unbreathable. I was in my late 20s, moving through shadows, carrying documents that were not always mine, telling stories that were not always true. Survival in that season required a flexibility with truth that I told myself was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be permanent. I spent 2 years in Pakistan. 2 years of watching over my shoulder, of learning which rooms were safe and which walls had ears pressed against them. I prayed 5 times a day without fail. I believed that obedience would build a wall around me. I believed that faithfulness was a kind of protection. Pakistan taught me otherwise. When I arrived in Malaysia in the spring of 1998, I was carrying documents that did not belong to me. I knew it. I told myself it was necessary. The authorities at the checkpoint knew it too. Within hours of landing, I was in a room with no windows, and within days I was in a Malaysian prison with men from a dozen different countries. None of us exactly where we had planned to be. The cell was small enough that when everyone lay down at night, the floor disappeared beneath bodies. The heat was a living thing. The smell of that place, sweat and fear, and something older and harder to name, embedded itself in my memory in a way that still surfaces without warning. I was 31 years old, alone in a foreign country, facing charges that could keep me there for years. I returned to what I knew. I prayed. I recited the verses I had memorized as a child, the ones my mother's voice had first carried into my ears. I sat with the words and let them move through me the way water moves through cupped hands, present for a moment, then gone. I was looking for something solid to hold. The words were not holding. It was during one of those nights, deep into the darkness when the cell was quiet except for the breathing of other men, that something happened that I do not have a complete framework for even now. I was reciting quietly to myself when I felt what I can only describe as a cold pressure filling the space around me. It was not temperature. It was something else. Something that made the air feel occupied. My heart rate changed before my mind understood why. I felt the way an animal feels before a storm. Something was wrong with the room. I understood in a way that bypassed thinking and landed directly in my chest that what was present in that space was not neutral. It was interested in me specifically. It felt hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. I had grown up hearing about the reality of dark spiritual forces. I had always understood that as metaphor or distant possibility. In that cell, it was neither. I began to rebuke it. I called on the name of God in the way I had always known. I pushed back with every word I had, and the thing did not leave. It circled. It pressed. I cried out in my own language, the Farsi of my childhood, the language my mother used when she was frightened. I asked God to help me, and then something else happened. A voice, not inside my head, not a feeling or an impression. A voice, clear and direct, that told me to bring the name of Jesus. I did not choose the next words. They came out of my mouth the way breath comes, without decision. I spoke the name. I asked, if you are real, show yourself. The dark thing was gone before I finished the sentence. The room was just a room again. Men breathing. Heat. The smell of the place. But something had shifted in the air the way a fever breaks, and the relief that followed was so complete and so sudden that I sat with it for a long time without moving. I did not know what had happened. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself the isolation was producing experiences that had psychological rather than spiritual explanations. I was educated enough to construct that argument. I was honest enough to know I did not fully believe it. Weeks passed. The case moved slowly through the Malaysian legal system. I had a small space in that cell that I had made my own, a corner where I sat in the early mornings before the heat made thinking difficult. I was sitting there one morning when the second experience came. There is no good way to describe what filled that corner, except to say that it was the opposite of everything that had been in the room on the first night. Where the first presence had been cold and predatory and interested in my destruction, this one was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was as if the air itself became kind. I felt the way I had felt as a very small child in my mother's kitchen, safe in a way that required no explanation. And then the knowing came, not a voice at first, just knowledge, arriving the way light fills a room when a door opens. He revealed to me his holiness in a way that my mind could not have produced on its own. He showed me what justice means at its absolute center, not as a legal concept, but as a living reality. He made it known to me that his nature and human sin cannot occupy the same space, the way light and darkness cannot coexist. And in that moment, I knew with the same certainty that I knew my own name, that I was not clean, not because I had carried false documents or lived in shadows, but at a level much deeper and older than any of my choices. I knew I deserved judgment, and I did not argue with it, because of holiness I was in the presence of made argument impossible. You cannot negotiate with the sun about whether it is bright. Then something touched my left shoulder, gentle, specific, a hand. He told me through that touch and through words that followed that I was forgiven. I told him I did not understand. He showed me that the forgiveness was complete and present, not deferred to some future accounting. I asked how that was possible. He revealed to me that he was the way, the truth, and the life. The words meant nothing to me then. I had never heard them. I asked for his name. He told me his name was Jesus. I fell, not dramatically, the way a man falls when his legs simply stop holding him because something larger than his body has moved through him. I lay on the floor of that Malaysian prison cell, and I understood that every wall I had built, every certainty I had carried from childhood, every framework I had used to understand existence, had been constructed around a door I had never opened. What came after was not easy. Nothing about what followed was easy. When I told the men in that cell what had happened, the room divided the way rooms always divide when someone says something that cannot be taken back. Some of the men turned away from me entirely. In a place where community is the only resource, being shunned is a specific and deliberate kind of suffering. Men who had shared food with me stopped meeting my eyes. Men who had spoken my name like a greeting began speaking it like a warning. Others listened, quietly, in corners. In the early mornings before the guards changed shifts, they came and asked questions. Some of them found what I had found, and that became its own danger. Because faith that grows in prison does not stay quiet, and not everyone watching was a friend. The legal process eventually concluded. I was released and moved on, but the years that followed carried the weight of that conversion in ways I had not anticipated. The community I had come from does not have a category for what I had become. There is no gentle word in that world for someone who is left. The rejection was total. Family members who had once been my foundation became strangers by necessity. The cost was not abstract. It was paid in relationships and in safety and in the particular loneliness of someone who has become unrecognizable to the people who first gave them their name. I carry that cost willingly, because the presence I met in that cell is more real to me than any wall I have ever touched. To every believer reading this, I ask you to pray specifically and persistently for those around the world who face danger, rejection, and loss because of their faith. Your prayers are not small. They reach into cells and corners and dark rooms where people are crying out in their native languages, asking for help. And if you are someone who has been carrying the weight of your own history and wondering if forgiveness is actually available to you, it is. Right now, in whatever room you are sitting in, you can speak to the one who came to me in that Malaysian prison. Tell him you know you have done wrong. Tell him you believe he paid the price for it. Ask him to come into your life. He will not turn away. Share this story. like this video. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, so we can pray for one another across every border and every distance.